Stop the wedding before it is too late. Nobody knew where the voice came from at first. The string quartet stopped playing. Conversations vanished into silence. More than 300 guests seated beneath crystal chandeliers turned toward the entrance of the Sterling Grand Ballroom. Standing there was a 16-year-old black girl nobody recognized. Zaria Brooks looked completely out of place among the luxury gowns, custom tuxedos, and wealthy families gathered for one of the most anticipated weddings in Boston that year. Her dark curls rested neatly against her shoulders. She wore a simple navy blue dress that looked modest compared to the designer outfits surrounding her. In one hand, she held a faded silver bracelet. In the other, she carried a sealed envelope. For several seconds, nobody moved. Then laughter began spreading through the room. A few guests exchanged amused smiles. Others whispered behind their hands. "Who invited her?" someone asked. "Is she part of the catering staff?" another guest said. The comments quickly multiplied. Zaria felt every stare in the room. She had expected resistance. She had prepared herself for embarrassment. But hearing complete strangers laugh at her still hurt more than she wanted to admit. Near the front of the ballroom, Margaret Sterling slowly rose from her chair. Elegant and perfectly composed, she represented everything the Sterling family valued: status, reputation, and control. She smiled politely, but her eyes revealed irritation. "Young lady," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "this is a private event." More laughter followed. Several guests nodded in agreement. Zaria swallowed hard. Her fingers tightened around the envelope. "I need to speak with Ethan Sterling." The room immediately grew quieter. Margaret's smile disappeared. "That will not be happening." "It has to happen," Zaria replied. "Today." Across the ballroom, Ethan Sterling stood beside his fiancée Charlotte Hayes near the floral-covered ceremony platform. At first, he looked confused, then curious. He studied the girl standing at the entrance. Something about her expression felt different. She did not look angry. She did not look desperate. She looked afraid. Afraid, but determined. William Sterling, the billionaire founder of Sterling Holdings and father of the groom, watched from the front row. Unlike the others, he said nothing. His attention remained fixed on the envelope in Zaria's hand. There was something familiar about it, though he could not explain why. Meanwhile, guests continued whispering. Some shook their heads. Others openly mocked the interruption. One woman laughed and said, "Someone should show her where the service entrance is." The comment triggered another round of amusement. Zaria lowered her eyes for a moment. Then she remembered her mother's final words. "No matter what happens, make sure Ethan sees the bracelet." Her heart began racing. This was the moment she had traveled hundreds of miles to reach. Slowly, she lifted the silver bracelet into the light. The ballroom lights reflected against its worn surface. Across the room, Ethan's gaze instantly locked onto it. The smile vanished from his face. The color drained from his skin. And for the first time that afternoon, the groom looked genuinely terrified. The silence that followed felt heavier than the music that had filled the ballroom only moments earlier. Ethan Sterling could not take his eyes off the silver bracelet. Guests looked from the groom to the teenage girl standing near the entrance, trying to understand what had caused such a dramatic change. Charlotte Hayes gently touched Ethan's arm. "Ethan," she asked quietly, "do you know her?" He did not answer. His eyes remained fixed on the bracelet. Zaria noticed the fear in his expression. It was the same reaction her mother had predicted years ago. For a moment, she almost turned around and walked away. She had spent months wondering whether coming here was the right decision. Now she was standing in front of some of the most powerful people in Massachusetts, and every one of them seemed to wish she would disappear. Margaret Sterling quickly stepped forward. "This interruption has gone on long enough," she said firmly. "Security." Two hotel employees immediately moved toward the entrance. Several guests nodded approvingly. Someone whispered that the ceremony should continue. Another guest joked that social media would have a field day with this disaster. But before anyone reached Zaria, Ethan suddenly spoke. "Wait." The single word stopped everyone. Margaret turned toward her son. "Ethan, this is not the time. Let her stay." The room became silent again. Even William Sterling looked surprised. Ethan slowly stepped away from the ceremony platform and walked toward Zaria. Each step seemed to make the tension grow. When he finally stopped a few feet away, he stared directly at the bracelet. "Where did you get that?" he asked. Zaria hesitated. "My mother gave it to me." Ethan swallowed hard. "What was her name?" For the first time, Uncertainty appeared in Zaria's eyes. She had imagined this conversation many times, but now that it was happening, the words felt heavier than she expected. Her name was Danielle Brooks. The moment those words left her mouth, Ethan's face lost even more color. Across the ballroom, William Sterling suddenly rose from his chair. A few guests noticed his reaction and began whispering again. Danielle Brooks meant nothing to most people in the room, but it clearly meant something to the Sterling family. William slowly approached. His expression was calm, but his eyes revealed something deeper. Recognition, concern, maybe even regret. "What did you say your mother's name was?" he asked. "Danielle Brooks," Zaria repeated. William stared at her for several seconds. Then he looked at the envelope in her hand. His attention immediately locked onto the handwriting written across the front. The billionaire's breathing seemed to slow. "Where did you get that letter?" he asked. "My mother left it for me before she passed away," Zaria answered softly. A murmur swept through the ballroom. William extended his hand. "May I see it?" Zaria looked down at the envelope. This was the reason she had come. The reason she had traveled hundreds of miles. The reason her mother had made her promise never to lose it. Slowly, she handed it to him. William took the envelope and stared at the handwriting. Then something happened that nobody expected. The billionaire's hand began to tremble, because he recognized every single letter written on the front. "Open it." Nobody could remember who spoke first. The words seemed to appear from somewhere inside the stunned crowd. William Sterling continued staring at the envelope as if he had forgotten where he was. Around him, the ballroom remained frozen in confusion. The wedding ceremony had completely stopped. Guests who had arrived expecting champagne toasts and celebration now found themselves watching a mystery unfold in real time. Ethan Sterling stood beside Zaria Brooks, unable to take his eyes off the silver bracelet. Charlotte Hayes remained near the ceremony platform, her expression filled with concern and uncertainty. Margaret Sterling was the only person who appeared angry. "This is ridiculous," she said sharply. "A random teenager arrives in the middle of a wedding, and suddenly everyone is acting as if she belongs here." Several guests nodded. Others seemed less certain now. William ignored her completely. His attention never left the envelope. Slowly, he ran his fingers across the handwriting on the front. The elegant script looked untouched by time. 15 years vanished from his face in an instant. Memories he had buried long ago began returning. A bright summer afternoon. A small cafe near the harbor. A woman sitting across from him with hopeful eyes and a silver bracelet on her wrist. William closed his eyes briefly. "No," he whispered. "It cannot be." Zaria heard him. "You know who wrote it, do not you?" she asked quietly. William looked at her. For the first time, he truly studied her face. Not as an interruption. Not as an inconvenience. As a person, he noticed the shape of her eyes. The determined expression. The way she stood her ground despite hundreds of people staring at her. Something about her reminded him of someone he had once known. Someone he had not thought about in years. Ethan stepped closer. "Dad, who is Danielle Brooks?" The question seemed to echo through the ballroom. William did not answer immediately. Margaret suddenly moved forward. "This conversation is inappropriate," she said. "Open the wedding gifts. Start the ceremony. Remove this girl." Her voice carried more urgency than before. Several people noticed. So did William. He slowly turned toward her. "Why are you nervous?" Margaret's expression hardened. "I am not nervous." "Then why do you keep trying to stop this?" Silence followed. The guests exchanged glances. Ethan looked from his mother to his father. Charlotte watched carefully. Zaria remained still. William finally looked back at the envelope. With trembling fingers, he carefully opened it. Inside was a single folded letter. A photograph slipped out and landed on the floor. Ethan bent down and picked it up. The moment he saw the image, his eyes widened. It showed a young woman standing beside William Sterling many years ago. Both were smiling. And on the woman's wrist was the exact same silver bracelet now resting in Zaria's hand. A wave of whispers spread across the ballroom. William unfolded the letter. His eyes scanned the first line. Then his entire expression changed. Shock, regret, disbelief. He looked up at Zaria as though seeing her for the first time. Because the very first sentence in Danielle Brooks's letter contained a secret nobody in the room was prepared to hear. The ballroom felt smaller now, as though the walls themselves were closing in around the secret hidden inside Danielle Brooks's letter. Nobody spoke. Nobody even seemed willing to breathe. William Sterling continued staring at the page while hundreds of guests watched him. The powerful billionaire who normally commanded boardrooms and television interviews suddenly looked like a man confronting a ghost. Ethan took a cautious step forward. "Dad," he said quietly. "What does it say?" William did not answer immediately. His eyes remained fixed on the first paragraph. Across the room, Margaret Sterling's composure was beginning to crack. She folded her arms tightly and avoided looking at the letter. Charlotte Hayes noticed. So did several guests nearby. Zaria stood silently, her heart pounding. For years she had carried this envelope without knowing exactly what was written inside. Her mother had always refused to explain. She would simply say, "When the time is right, the truth will find the people who need it." Now that moment had finally arrived. William slowly lowered the letter. His face had changed. Not with anger, not with confusion, with regret. Deep regret. "Danielle wrote this shortly before she died," he said. The room remained silent. "The first sentence says that everything I believed about the past was wrong." A wave of whispers moved through the guests. Ethan looked stunned. "What does that mean?" William looked toward Zaria. "It means your mother knew something important." Zaria swallowed hard. "My mother always said the letter would answer questions." William nodded slowly. "It does." Margaret suddenly stepped forward. "This is enough," she said sharply. "Whatever happened years ago has nothing to do with this wedding." Her interruption only made the room more suspicious. William turned toward her. "Why do you keep trying to stop this conversation?" Margaret's eyes widened slightly. "Because this is not the place for it. Or because you already know what is in this letter." The question landed like thunder. Several guests gasped. Ethan stared at his mother. Charlotte looked equally shocked. Margaret opened her mouth, but said nothing. William returned his attention to the letter. "Danielle wrote that 15 years ago she tried to contact me many times." He paused. "She said every message disappeared before reaching me." The silence became overwhelming. Ethan slowly looked toward his mother again. Margaret's expression grew tense. William continued reading. "She wrote that someone close to our family made certain I never received her letters." Another murmur spread through the ballroom. Zaria felt her pulse racing. She had expected revelations. She had not expected this. William turned the page. His hand visibly trembled. "There is more." Nobody moved. Nobody wanted to miss a single word. "Danielle says she kept proof. Documents. Records. Everything." Ethan frowned. "Proof of what?" William's eyes scanned the next line. The color immediately drained from his face. He looked up at Zaria, then at Ethan, then toward Margaret. For several long seconds, he seemed unable to speak. Finally, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "According to this letter, the person who hid the truth all these years was standing in our family home the entire time." The moment William Sterling finished speaking, the ballroom erupted into whispers. Guests who had arrived expecting a flawless society wedding now found themselves witnessing something far more dramatic. Every conversation centered on the same question. Who had hidden the truth? Ethan looked from his father to his mother. The uncertainty in his eyes was impossible to miss. "Dad," he said carefully, "what exactly are you saying?" William remained silent for several seconds. He seemed to be reading the same lines over and over, as though hoping they would somehow change. But they did not. The words remained there on the page, written in Danielle Brooks's unmistakable handwriting. Across the room, Margaret Sterling stood perfectly still. Her face revealed almost nothing. Yet for the first time since Zaria arrived, she was no longer trying to take control of the situation. That alone caught people's attention. William slowly continued reading. "Danielle says she wrote dozens of letters over the years." He paused. "She says every one of them was returned, intercepted, or disappeared." Ethan frowned. Why would that happen? Nobody answered. William turned another page. A folded document slipped from the envelope and landed on the floor. Benjamin Hayes, Charlotte's father, bent down and picked it up. His eyes immediately widened. "William," he said quietly, "you need to see this." The billionaire accepted the paper and stared at it. It was a photocopy of an old mailing receipt. Then another. Then another. Several documents had been preserved together. Dates, tracking numbers, addresses. Every one of them linked to correspondence Danielle had attempted to send years earlier. William's hands trembled. "These are real," he whispered. The ballroom became silent once again. Zaria watched carefully. She had never seen these documents before. Her mother had kept everything hidden until the very end. William continued reading. Danielle says she realized someone close to the Sterling family was preventing the truth from reaching you. Margaret immediately looked away. Ethan noticed. Charlotte noticed. Several guests noticed as well. William lifted his eyes from the letter. Danielle also wrote that she left evidence with someone she trusted. Zaria's heart began racing. Who? She asked softly. William looked back at the page. She does not name the person here. A collective sigh of frustration moved through the crowd. But then William reached the next paragraph. His entire posture changed. Ethan immediately saw it. What is it? William looked at his son. Danielle says the evidence was never meant for me. The room fell silent. It was meant for you. Ethan blinked. For me? William nodded slowly. She wrote that one day you would need to know the truth before making the biggest decision of your life. Guests exchanged confused looks. Charlotte's expression became increasingly worried. Ethan stared at the letter. What truth? William's eyes moved to the final line of the page. The color disappeared from his face once again. He looked toward Zaria, then toward Margaret, then back at Ethan. For a moment, it seemed as though he could not force himself to say the words. Finally, he spoke. According to Danielle, the reason she wanted this letter delivered today is because your wedding day was the last possible moment before a secret about our family became impossible to undo. The words hung over the ballroom like a storm cloud nobody could escape. Ethan Sterling stood motionless, staring at his father. Around him, the guests seemed equally frozen. The wedding planner had long since stopped trying to save the ceremony. The musicians sat quietly. The photographers lowered their cameras. Every person in the room understood that whatever happened next mattered more than the wedding itself. William Sterling slowly folded the letter and looked toward Zaria Brooks. Your mother spent 15 years trying to make sure this message reached the right person, he said softly. Zaria nodded. She told me there would come a day when somebody finally listened. William lowered his eyes. I should have listened years ago. Across the room, Margaret Sterling suddenly stood. Enough. Her voice was sharp and controlled. This has gone far enough. But for the first time all afternoon, nobody paid attention to her. Ethan stepped closer to his father. What truth was she talking about? He asked. William hesitated. The answer clearly frightened him. He unfolded the final page of Danielle's letter and continued reading. If Ethan is reading this, he said aloud, then he deserves to know why I spent so many years protecting a secret that was never mine to keep. A ripple of whispers moved through the crowd. Charlotte Hayes looked increasingly concerned. Zaria felt her heart racing. Even she had never heard these words before. William continued. There is a small safety deposit box registered under my name. Inside are documents, photographs, and records proving everything I am about to say. He paused. The key was hidden inside the silver bracelet. Every eye immediately shifted toward the bracelet in Zaria's hand. Ethan looked stunned. The bracelet. Zaria stared at it in disbelief. Her mother had never mentioned a key. William reached for the bracelet carefully. Turning it over, he noticed a tiny seam hidden beneath years of wear. With gentle pressure, a small compartment clicked open. A tiny brass key slid into his palm. Gasps echoed throughout the ballroom. Margaret's face instantly lost color. William looked at the key and then back at the letter. Danielle wrote that the contents of the box would explain why certain people worked so hard to keep her away from our family. Ethan slowly turned toward his mother. Mom. Margaret looked away. That reaction alone seemed to answer more questions than words ever could. William continued reading. Most importantly, the documents will reveal the true reason I was told to disappear and why Ethan's future was tied to that decision. The room became silent once again. Charlotte frowned. What does that mean? Nobody knew. Not yet. William reached the final paragraph. As his eyes scanned the last few lines, his entire expression changed. He looked shocked, then saddened, then completely speechless. Ethan immediately noticed. Dad, what is it? William slowly lowered the letter. For several seconds, he seemed unable to speak. Finally, he looked directly at Ethan and Zaria. Danielle says the documents inside that box will prove that both of your lives were changed by the same lie. For several long seconds, nobody in the ballroom moved. The tiny brass key resting in William Sterling's palm suddenly felt more important than the wedding itself. Hundreds of guests watched in silence as years of unanswered questions seemed to gather around a single object. Ethan Sterling stared at the key. Charlotte Hayes stared at the key. Even Margaret Sterling could not look away. Zaria Brooks felt her heart pounding against her chest. Her mother had carried that bracelet for years. Yet somehow, a hidden compartment and a secret key had remained unnoticed until this moment. William carefully folded Danielle's letter and slipped it back into the envelope. "There is only one way to find out the truth now," he said quietly. Ethan nodded. "The safety deposit box." William looked at him. "Yes." A murmur spread through the crowd. The guests had expected a ceremony. Instead, they were witnessing the unraveling of a mystery that stretched back 15 years. Charlotte finally stepped forward. "Can someone please explain what is happening?" Her voice was calm, but the concern was obvious. Ethan looked at her apologetically. "I wish I could." William slowly turned toward Zaria. "Did your mother ever mention a bank?" Zaria thought for a moment. Then a memory surfaced. A rainy evening. Her mother sitting at the kitchen table. A photograph. A name. "Commonwealth Trust Bank," she said. William's eyes widened immediately. "That is it." The reaction was instant. Margaret took a sudden step forward. "This is insane," she said. "You are basing everything on old letters and vague memories." Her voice sounded stronger than before, but something underneath had changed. Fear. William noticed it. Ethan noticed it. Zaria noticed it. "You seem very concerned about what we might find," William said quietly. Margaret shook her head. "I am concerned because this family is being humiliated in front of hundreds of people." William stared at her for several seconds. "No, I think you are concerned about something else." The silence that followed felt almost unbearable. Then Ethan spoke. "Mom, if there is nothing to hide, then the documents will prove it." Margaret did not answer. That silence spoke louder than any explanation. William looked back at the envelope. There was one final sheet folded behind Danielle's letter. He carefully unfolded it. A handwritten note appeared, smaller than the others, more personal. His eyes moved across the page. Suddenly, he froze. Ethan immediately noticed. "What does it say?" William swallowed hard. This note was written for Zaria. The entire ballroom grew quiet once again. William began reading aloud. "If you are hearing this, then you were brave enough to do what I never could. Remember this. You are not bringing destruction. You are bringing truth." Tears filled Zaria's eyes. William continued reading. "And when the box is finally opened, tell William to look at the photograph hidden beneath the documents. That photograph will reveal who knew the truth from the very beginning." William slowly lowered the note. Across the room, Margaret Sterling's face turned completely pale. Margaret Sterling's reaction changed everything. Until that moment, there had still been room for doubt, room for explanations, room for coincidence. But the instant the note mentioned a photograph hidden beneath the documents, the confidence disappeared from her face. Hundreds of guests noticed it. Ethan noticed it. William noticed it most of all. The ballroom remained silent as Margaret slowly sat back down. For the first time all afternoon, she seemed unable to find the right words. William folded Danielle's note and slipped it into the envelope. His eyes never left Margaret. "You knew about the photograph." It was not a question. Margaret looked away. "I do not know what you are talking about." William sighed. The response sounded weaker than anything she had said before. Ethan stepped forward. "Mom, please." His voice carried more disappointment than anger. "If there is something we should know, tell us now." Margaret remained silent. Charlotte Hayes watched the exchange carefully. Around them, guests exchanged uneasy glances. Nobody expected a confession, but nobody expected such obvious discomfort either. Zaria Brooks stood quietly near the entrance. She had not come for revenge. She had not come for money. She had come because her mother had asked her to deliver the truth. Yet now that the truth was beginning to emerge, she felt sympathy for the family watching their carefully constructed world unravel. William finally spoke again. "Danielle spent years trying to reach me." He looked toward Margaret, and somehow every letter disappeared. Margaret lowered her eyes. Ethan's expression hardened. "Did you stop them?" The question echoed through the ballroom. For several seconds, Margaret said nothing. Then she answered, "I thought I was protecting this family." Gasps swept through the crowd. Ethan stared at her. Charlotte covered her mouth. William closed his eyes briefly. The admission was not complete, but it was enough. Margaret continued speaking softly. "Years ago, I believed Danielle's presence would create problems. I thought distance would solve everything." William looked stunned. "So you intercepted the letters?" Margaret did not answer directly. She did not need to. Her silence confirmed what everyone already suspected. Ethan stepped backward. The realization was difficult to process. 15 years of hidden correspondence. 15 years of unanswered questions. 15 years of decisions built on incomplete information. William slowly shook his head. One choice changed all of our lives. Zarya looked down at the bracelet. Her mother had carried the burden of that choice for years. Yet even now, Danielle's final note contained no anger. Only instructions. Only truth. William suddenly straightened. The bank closes in less than 2 hours. Everyone looked at him. He held up the brass key. Whatever is inside that safety deposit box will answer the rest. Ethan immediately nodded. Then we go now. Charlotte hesitated for only a moment before stepping beside him. William looked toward Zarya. You are coming too. Tears formed in Zarya's eyes. She nodded. Across the ballroom, Margaret's face turned pale once again. Because for the first time all day, she no longer seemed worried about a letter. She seemed terrified of what the unopened box was about to reveal. Less than 90 minutes later, the atmosphere could not have been more different. The wedding guests remained gathered inside the ballroom, waiting for answers, while William Sterling, Ethan Sterling, Charlotte Hayes, and Zarya Brooks sat in a private conference room at Commonwealth Trust Bank. The small brass key rested on the polished table beside a metal safety deposit box. For several seconds, nobody moved. Years of uncertainty had led to this moment. William finally picked up the key and inserted it into the lock. A soft click echoed through the room. Then he slowly opened the box. Inside were dozens of carefully preserved documents, photographs, and letters arranged in neat folders. Resting on top was a note written in Danielle Brooks's handwriting. William unfolded it first. If you are reading this, he read aloud, then the truth has finally found its way home. Zarya felt tears forming immediately. William continued, I never wanted revenge. I only wanted honesty. The people in this room deserve to know what really happened. Beneath the note sat a collection of unopened letters addressed to William Sterling. Every one of them had been mailed years ago. Every one of them had been returned before reaching him. Ethan stared at the stack in disbelief. Then Charlotte discovered a sealed envelope marked photograph. Remembering Danielle's instructions, William carefully opened it. Inside was a single picture. The moment he saw it, he closed his eyes. The photograph showed Danielle standing beside William many years earlier. Both were smiling. Both looked happy. Standing only a few feet away was Margaret Sterling. And on the back of the photograph, Danielle had written a simple note. Margaret was there the day I told William the truth. Silence filled the room. Ethan slowly lowered his head. The evidence removed every remaining doubt. Margaret had known. William sat quietly for a long time before speaking. 15 years, he whispered. 15 years built on a lie. Zarya looked at the letters scattered across the table. My mother never hated any of you, she said softly. She told me that every time she talked about the past. William looked at her with surprise. After everything that happened? Zarya nodded. She said carrying anger only creates more pain. For the first time that day, William smiled sadly. Then he noticed one final document at the bottom of the box. It was not about money, not about inheritance, not about blame. It was a letter addressed directly to Zarya. With trembling hands, she opened it and began reading. Danielle's final message spoke of courage, forgiveness, and the importance of truth. It ended with a single sentence. Live the life I was always proud of. Tears rolled down Zarya's cheeks. Hours later, when they returned to the ballroom, the wedding did not continue as originally planned. Instead, Ethan stood before the guests and spoke honestly about truth, family, and second chances. No one remembered the decorations. No one remembered the menu. They remembered the moment a young black girl arrived carrying a bracelet, a letter, and the courage to tell the truth. And as the evening came to an end, William Sterling quietly handed the silver bracelet back to Zarya. Not as evidence, not as a secret, but as a reminder that sometimes the bravest person in the room is the one willing to be laughed at in order to do what is right.